I'm Lauren, 24 years old, and 3 months ago I moved out of my cramped studio apartment in downtown Phoenix into the beautiful house my father left me in Scottsdale. Dad passed away 6 months ago from a sudden heart attack at 47, way too young, way too sudden. The doctors said it was genetic, something that ran in his family that none of us knew about. The house sits in a quiet neighborhood called Desert Ridge, with perfectly manicured lawns and those tall palm trees that make Arizona feel like paradise. It's got 4 bedrooms, a gorgeous kitchen with granite countertops, and a backyard pool that sparkles turquoise in the desert sun. After living in that shoebox apartment where I could barely fit my bed and a dresser, this place felt like a mansion. Dad had bought it just 4 years ago with the money from his construction business. He'd worked his way up from laying concrete to owning Henderson Construction Company, and this house was his pride and joy. I remember him giving me the grand tour, pointing out every detail, the hardwood floors he'd personally selected, the custom cabinets he'd had installed, the security system that made him feel safe. My parents divorced when I was 8. They were just kids when they got married because Mom was pregnant with me, and the pressure from both families pushed them into a marriage they weren't ready for. They tried to make it work, but Dad's long hours building his business and Mom's resentment about giving up her dreams created a toxic cycle of fights and cold silences. The divorce was messy but fair. Mom got a substantial settlement, around $80,000 plus monthly alimony, and Dad got joint custody of me. I spent weekdays with Mom and weekends with Dad, switching houses like a ping-pong ball. But I loved both my parents deeply, even if they couldn't love each other. After the divorce, Mom remarried pretty quickly. She met Greg at a church social, and within 3 years they were married. Greg worked at a manufacturing plant, steady but not spectacular money. Soon after, my half-siblings came along, Brooklyn, now 12, and Mason 10. The age gap made it hard for us to connect when they were little, but they were good kids. Dad never remarried. He poured everything into his business and into our weekend adventures. We'd go hiking in Sedona, catch Diamondbacks games, or just work on projects around whatever house he was living in. When he bought the Scottsdale house, those weekends became even more special. Living here now, I feel close to him. Sometimes I sit in his home office, surrounded by his construction awards and family photos, and I can almost hear his laugh echoing through the hallways. This house isn't just my inheritance, it's my connection to the man who taught me that hard work pays off and that family comes first. But I had no idea that philosophy was about to be tested in the worst possible way. 6 weeks after settling into my new life, Mom called me in tears. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was relaxing by the pool after a long day at my marketing job downtown. "Lauren, honey, I need to ask you something," she said, her voice shaking. "I hate to bother you, but we're in real trouble." My stomach dropped. "What kind of trouble, Mom?" "Greg lost his job. The whole Phoenix Metal Works plant shut down last month, just like that, no warning, nothing. We've been staying at the Desert Inn Motel on Van Buren for 2 weeks, but we're running out of money fast." I could hear Brooklyn and Mason in the background, their voices echoing in what sounded like a small, cramped space. The Desert Inn wasn't exactly a 5-star establishment, it was the kind of place you stayed when you had nowhere else to go. "How much do you need?" I asked, already reaching for my purse. "It's not about money, sweetie. We need somewhere to stay, just temporarily, until Greg finds another job. I know it's a lot to ask, but you've got all that space now, and we're almost homeless." I looked around at Dad's house, my house, with its 4 bedrooms and open floor plan. The logical part of my brain said it made perfect sense. The emotional part worried about disrupting the peaceful life I'd finally found. "Of course you can stay here," I heard myself saying. "Pack up your stuff and come over tonight if you need to." "Oh, Lauren, thank you so much. You're saving our lives." 2 hours later, a battered Honda Civic pulled into my driveway. Greg looked exhausted as he unloaded their meager belongings, mostly clothes stuffed into garbage bags and a few toys for the kids. Mom hugged me tight, whispering thank you over and over again. Brooklyn and Mason were shy at first, overwhelmed by the size of the house after weeks in a motel room. But kids adapt quickly, and soon they were splashing in the pool and exploring their temporary new home. I gave Mom and Greg the master guest suite, and the kids got to share the room with twin beds that Dad had set up for when they visited. It felt good to see the house full of life again, even if the circumstances weren't ideal. "This is just until Greg finds something," Mom assured me as we sat on the patio that first night. "He's got applications out everywhere, Home Depot, Costco, even some of the smaller manufacturing places. Something will come through soon. Greg nodded, sipping the beer I'd offered him. I appreciate this more than you know, Lauren. I've been working since I was 16, and I've never been unemployed this long. It's humbling. Family helps family, I said, repeating one of Dad's favorite sayings. You do the same for me. And I meant it. Despite our complicated history, Mom had raised me with love and sacrifice. She'd worked 2 jobs during the divorce, made sure I had everything I needed, and never once badmouthed Dad in front of me. If she needed help, I was going to give it. But as I watched Greg settle into Dad's favorite chair and saw Mom rearranging the kitchen to her liking, a small voice in my head whispered a warning I chose to ignore. A month passed, and what was supposed to be a temporary arrangement started feeling uncomfortably permanent. Greg had indeed been looking for work, but his efforts seemed half-hearted at best. Most days, I'd come home from my marketing job to find him planted on the couch, remote in hand, watching ESPN or old movies. Any luck today? I'd ask, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Man, the economy's just brutal right now, he'd respond, not taking his eyes off the screen. Nobody's hiring, especially guys my age. But I'm staying positive, something will break soon. Meanwhile, Mom had transformed the house into her own domain. She'd rearranged the living room furniture, replaced Dad's coffee with some organic blend she preferred, and filled the refrigerator with foods Brooklyn and Mason liked. The kids had claimed the backyard as their personal playground, leaving pool toys and bikes scattered around the carefully maintained landscape. Don't get me wrong, I loved having Brooklyn and Mason around. They were bright, funny kids who reminded me of myself at that age. Brooklyn was artistic and dramatic, always putting on little shows for us after dinner. Mason was a sports fanatic who knew every statistic about every Phoenix Suns player going back 5 years. But I was starting to feel like a guest in my own home. Mom had strong opinions about everything from how I loaded the dishwasher to what temperature I kept the house. Greg had developed a routine of smoking cigarettes on the back patio, something Dad never would have allowed, leaving but scattered around the pool area. You know, Mom said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner, this house is perfect for a family. Your dad did good picking this place out. Something in her tone made me look up from the dishes. Yeah, he really loved it here. It's funny how life works out, isn't it? I mean, here we are, all together under one roof. Maybe there's a reason for all this. I didn't respond, but that comment stuck with me. What did she mean by a reason for all this? The breaking point came during week 5. I'd had a particularly stressful day at work. A client had rejected our entire campaign proposal, and I'd had to stay late to brainstorm alternatives. All I wanted was to come home, order some Chinese takeout, and veg out by the pool. Instead, I found the house in chaos. Brooklyn and Mason were fighting over the TV remote, their voices echoing through the great room. Mom was on the phone with someone, discussing some kind of legal matter in hushed tones. Greg was passed out on the couch, snoring loudly, an empty beer bottle on the coffee table. Where's the takeout menu for Golden Dragon? I asked Mom when she hung up. Oh, I threw those away. Too much sodium and MSG. I made a nice quinoa salad instead, it's in the fridge. I stared at her. She'd thrown away my takeout menus? In my house? I need some air, I said, heading for the back patio. But even there, I couldn't find peace. Greg's cigarette smell lingered in the desert breeze, and I could hear Mom inside, directing Brooklyn and Mason in their bedtime routine like she was the adult in charge. For the first time since they'd moved in, I seriously wondered what I'd gotten myself into. This was supposed to be temporary, but nobody seemed to be in any hurry to leave. In fact, they all seemed remarkably comfortable with the new arrangement. Too comfortable, as I was about to discover. Last Thursday changed everything. The kids were asleep, and I was in Dad's office, working on a presentation for a new client. Around 9:30, Mom knocked on the door. Lauren, honey, can we talk? Greg and I have something important to discuss with you. My heart actually fluttered with hope. Maybe Greg had finally found a job. Maybe they were ready to talk about moving out timelines. I closed my laptop and followed her to the living room, where Greg was sitting forward on the couch, looking unusually serious. We've been doing a lot of thinking, Mom began, settling into Dad's favorite chair. And we've made a decision about our situation. That's great, I said, settling onto the love seat. What kind of decision? Mom looked at Greg, who nodded encouragingly. I've been talking to a lawyer, sweetie. About Dad's will. The room went cold. What about Dad's will? Well, I think there might have been some oversights in how things were handled. I sacrificed a lot during my marriage to your father, Lauren. I gave up my career, my dreams, everything to support him while he built his business. I raised you, maintained his household, and made it possible for him to become successful. I felt like I was watching this conversation from outside my body. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying that this house should be mine. I earned it through years of sacrifice, and I didn't ask for nearly enough in the divorce settlement. I was young and stupid, and I let the lawyers talk me into taking less than I deserved. Greg spoke up for the first time. Your mom's been more than fair, Lauren. She let you live here for months without asking for anything. But we need stability for Brooklyn and Mason, and this house is rightfully hers. Rightfully hers? I stood up, my legs suddenly shaky. This house belonged to my father. He left it to me in his will. Wills can be contested, Mom said quietly. And I've already filed the paperwork. You'll be served in the next few days, but I wanted to give you a heads up so you could start looking for a new place. The words hit me like a physical blow. You're trying to steal my house? I'm claiming what should have been mine all along, Mom replied, her voice getting stronger. I supported your father for years, Lauren. I made his success possible. This house was bought with money that I helped him earn. You got $80,000 in the divorce settlement, which was nothing compared to what I gave up. I could have had my own career, my own life. Instead, I devoted myself to being a wife and mother. I looked at Greg, who was nodding along like this made perfect sense. You're both insane. This is my house. Dad left it to me. And we'll see what the courts say about that, Mom said. But Lauren, be practical. You're young, you have your whole life ahead of you. Brooklyn and Mason need stability, and I need security. This house is perfect for our family. Our family. I laughed, but it came out harsh and bitter. You mean the family you started after you divorced my father? I mean all of us. You're welcome to stay, of course. This can be a multi-generational home. I stared at her, finally seeing the calculation behind her kindness. The month of letting them stay here hadn't been about temporary help, it had been about establishing residency, about making a case that this house was their home too. Get out, I said quietly. Lauren, be reasonable. Get out. I screamed, my voice echoing through the house. Get out of my house right now. Greg stood up, his face flushing red. This is as much our house as it is yours, and soon it's going to be completely ours. You can't just kick us out. Watch me, I said, already reaching for my phone. You have 10 minutes to pack your stuff and leave, or I'm calling the police. You're bluffing, Mom said, but I could see uncertainty in her eyes. Try me, I replied, dialing 911. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd ever imagined possible. My own mother, the woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me about kindness and family loyalty, had been planning to steal my inheritance from the moment she stepped foot in this house. And she'd used my love for her to do it. I wasn't bluffing. When Mom and Greg refused to leave, barricading themselves in the master bedroom, I followed through on my threat. The Phoenix police arrived within 20 minutes, and I filed a formal trespassing complaint against all 4 of them. Ma'am, this is a civil matter, Officer Rodriguez explained as we stood in the driveway. But if you're the legal owner and you're asking them to leave, we can escort them off the property. I want them gone, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. All of them. Tonight. The hardest part was watching Brooklyn and Mason pack their belongings, confusion and fear written across their young faces. They didn't understand why their big sister was suddenly throwing them out, why their parents were arguing with police officers, why their temporary safe haven was crumbling around them. Lauren, please, Brooklyn whispered as she stuffed her art supplies into a backpack. Did we do something wrong? My heart broke, but I couldn't back down. No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. But your parents made some very bad choices, and this is the consequence. Mom cursed at me as she packed, calling me selfish and ungrateful. Greg muttered about lawyers and lawsuits. But I stood firm, watching from the kitchen window as they loaded their few possessions into the Honda Civic. "This isn't over," Mom said as Officer Rodriguez escorted her to the car. "I'm going to fight this, Lauren. I'm going to take everything your father should have given me." "Good luck with that," I replied, though my hands were shaking. After they left, I called Dad's attorney, Frank Morrison, the man who'd handled both the divorce and Dad's estate. Even though it was almost midnight, he answered on the second ring. "Lauren, what's wrong?" I explained the situation, barely holding back tears. Frank listened quietly, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "She can try to contest the will," he said finally, "but her chances are slim to none. She hasn't had contact with your father in years, she remarried and had other children, and she received a substantial divorce settlement. No judge is going to award her additional property based on her contributions to a marriage that ended 16 years ago. So I'm safe. Legally, yes. But Lauren, I have to warn you, even frivolous lawsuits can be expensive and emotionally draining. Are you prepared for that fight?" I looked around Dad's house, my house, at the family photos on the mantle and the construction awards on the walls. "I'm prepared for whatever it takes." "Good. I'll start preparing our defense tomorrow. And Lauren, you did the right thing. Your father worked hard for this house, and he wanted you to have it. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for honoring his wishes." After I hung up, I sat alone in the sudden quiet. The house felt enormous and empty, but for the first time in weeks, it felt like mine again. I could eat Chinese takeout if I wanted to. I could keep the thermostat at whatever temperature I preferred. I could watch whatever I wanted on TV. But the victory felt hollow. I just had my own mother arrested for trespassing. I'd thrown 2 innocent kids out into the night with nowhere to go. I'd chosen property over family, and while I knew I was legally in the right, the emotional cost was staggering. I called my best friend Amanda, who'd been watching this whole situation unfold with growing concern. "I can't believe she actually tried to steal your house," Amanda said after I explained what happened. "I mean, I never liked your mom, but this is next level crazy." "She's not crazy," I said, curled up on Dad's couch. "She's desperate. And desperate people do desperate things." "That doesn't make it okay, Lauren. You opened your home to her, and she tried to steal it. You had every right to kick her out." But as I hung up and prepared for bed, I couldn't shake the image of Brooklyn and Mason's scared faces. Whatever Mom had done, those kids were innocent victims in this mess. And I was the one who'd made them homeless. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing from Mom or Greg. I tried to focus on work, on reclaiming my space, on moving forward. But every time I looked at the empty bedrooms where Brooklyn and Mason had slept, guilt gnawed at me. Then last Tuesday, my phone rang with an unknown number. "Lauren, it's Greg." My first instinct was to hang up, but something in his voice stopped me. He sounded defeated, broken. "What do you want, Greg?" "I need to ask you a favor. I know you have every right to say no, but I'm desperate here." I stayed silent, letting him continue. "I found my brother Danny in Flagstaff. He's got a poultry farm up there, and he's willing to let us work for him. It's not much, but it's steady work and a place to live. The thing is, we need bus fare to get there, and we're completely broke." "Where are you staying?" "Back at the Desert Inn. We've been here since we left your house. But we can't afford it much longer, and Lauren, the kids are scared. Brooklyn's been having nightmares, and Mason keeps asking when we're going home." I closed my eyes, picturing those 2 kids in that awful motel room. "How much do you need?" $300. For 4 bus tickets and maybe a little extra for food on the trip. I know I have no right to ask, but... "I'll send it," I interrupted. "But Greg, I want to see them before you leave. I want to say goodbye to Brooklyn and Mason. I think your mom would like that too. She's been too proud to call you herself, but she misses you." An hour later, I was standing outside room 127 at the Desert Inn, holding an envelope with $400 cash. The place was even worse than I'd imagined. Peeling paint, broken concrete, the smell of cigarettes and desperation hanging in the desert air. Greg looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. His clothes were wrinkled, his face unshaven, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. But he thanked me genuinely as I handed him the money. "The kids are in the bathroom getting cleaned up," he said. They'll be so happy to see you." When Brooklyn and Mason emerged, they launched themselves at me with hugs that nearly knocked me over. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by their circumstances. "Are you still mad at us?" Mason asked, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "I was never mad at you," I said, kneeling to his level. "I was mad at some choices the grown-ups made, but never at you." Brooklyn, always the perceptive one, studied my face carefully. "Are we going to live with you again?" "No, sweetheart. You're going to live with your Uncle Danny on his farm. You'll get to take care of chickens and see animals every day." "Will you visit us?" I looked at Mom, who was sitting quietly on the motel bed, watching our reunion with tears in her eyes. "Maybe someday." After the kids went back to packing, Mom and I stepped outside to talk privately. "I'm sorry," she said without preamble. "I was wrong to try to take your house. I was desperate and scared, and I made terrible choices. Why didn't you just ask me for help? Real help, not lies about temporary stays." "Because I was ashamed. Because I've been struggling for years, and I didn't want to admit that I'd failed at providing for my family." I studied her face, seeing the exhaustion and defeat that mirrored Greg's. "You dropped the lawsuit?" "Last week. I told Frank Morrison that I was withdrawing the petition. I never should have filed it in the first place." "No, you shouldn't have." We stood in uncomfortable silence, the weight of broken trust hanging between us. Mom looked older than her 46 years, worn down by circumstances and poor choices. "I know you'll probably never forgive me," she said finally. "But I want you to know that I'm grateful. For letting us stay for this money, for not completely writing us off. You're a better person than I am." "I'm not better than anyone," I replied. "I'm just trying to do what Dad would have wanted." "He'd be proud of you, Lauren. For standing up for yourself and for helping us even after what I did." The next morning, I drove them to the Greyhound station downtown. Brooklyn and Mason were excited about their adventure, chattering about farms and chickens and new beginnings. Mom and Greg were quiet, processing the reality of starting over in their 40s. As their bus pulled away, I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, sadness, guilt, and something that might have been hope. They were getting a fresh start, and maybe that was what all of us needed. 3 months have passed since that day at the bus station, and I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. The house feels like home now, not just Dad's house or the place where my family drama unfolded. I've redecorated the guest rooms, turning one into a proper home office and the other into a yoga studio. The pool area has been restored to its former glory, free of cigarette butts and abandoned toys. Mom texts me occasionally with updates from Flagstaff. Danny's poultry farm is small but successful, and Greg has thrown himself into the work with an enthusiasm I never saw when he was living on my couch. Brooklyn and Mason have adjusted well to rural life, making friends at their new school and helping with the chickens after homework. "The kids ask about you all the time," Mom wrote in her latest message. "Brooklyn drew you a picture of our new house. It's tiny but cozy. Mason learned to ride a horse at the neighbor's ranch. They're happy here, Lauren. Really happy." I'm glad they're doing well, but I'm also glad they're doing well somewhere else. The experience taught me important lessons about boundaries, about the difference between helping someone and enabling them, about the cost of putting family loyalty above self-preservation. Amanda comes over most weekends now, and we've started hosting small dinner parties for friends from work. The house feels alive again, but in a different way than when it was full of chaos and tension. Now it's filled with laughter and conversation, with people who choose to be here rather than people who need to be here. I've been dating someone new, a guy named Trevor who works in renewable energy and shares my love of hiking. When I told him about the situation with Mom, he was amazed that I'd handled it so calmly. "I don't know if I could have kicked my own mother out," he said, "even if she was trying to steal my house." "It wasn't about kicking her out," I explained. "It was about protecting what my father worked so hard to give me. Sometimes love means saying no." I still think about Dad a lot, especially when I'm sitting in his office or working in the garden he planted. I like to think he'd be proud of how I handled the situation, that I was generous when generosity was called for, but firm when firmness was required. The legal battle never materialized. Frank Morrison said Mom's withdrawal of the lawsuit was unconditional and complete, with no possibility of refiling. The house is mine, free and clear, just as Dad intended. But more importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts. When that little voice in my head whispered warnings about Mom's true intentions, I should have listened sooner. When I felt like a guest in my own home, I should have addressed it immediately. When love starts to feel like manipulation, it's time to step back and reassess. I've also learned that helping people sometimes means not helping them, that enabling bad behavior isn't kindness, it's cruelty disguised as compassion. Last weekend, I was organizing Dad's closet when I found a letter he'd written to me but never sent. It was dated just a month before he died, and it said, "Lauren, I'm leaving you this house because I know you'll appreciate it and take care of it. But more than that, I'm leaving it to you because I trust you to make good decisions about who belongs in your life. Don't let anyone take advantage of your generous heart. You're stronger than you know." It was like getting one last piece of advice from beyond the grave, and it confirmed what I already knew in my heart: I'd made the right choice. I'm not sure if Mom and I will ever fully repair our relationship. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. But I'm open to the possibility of forgiveness, of starting fresh, of finding a way to be family again without the drama and manipulation. For now though, I'm content with my beautiful house, my growing career, and the peace that comes from knowing I stood up for myself when it mattered most. Dad would be proud, and that's all that really matters. Sometimes the hardest thing about family isn't loving them, it's loving them enough to say no.
What would you do in this situation? Let us know in the comments. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping family drama, shocking betrayals, and the revenge stories you won't believe.